It's an inflation together with stagnating production. If the inflation happens fast enough, for example, like in Germany, but even much slower than that crazy situation, then you could have a stagflation. That certainly is a possibility here. Once again, free private enterprise. Right? It's a mantra in our culture. Free private enterprise means it is the freedom of each producer to set whatever price he wishes. So the producer who sees that the Federal Reserve is pumping money in the system can respond by raising prices. That decision by the private capitalist is undertaken to make money for him, but its social consequences can be a disaster. But that's what private enterprise always is. People who make private decisions with social consequences that they don't have to take any responsibility for. You're supposed to believe Adam Smith, that if each of us does what's best for ourselves, as if by magic, the hidden hand of God will make it all work out. Well, just in case there isn't such a hidden hand, I'm not even going to go to the next step, but if God is busy doing something else, then each of us taking care of ourselves doesn't produce the best outcome for everybody, it can produce the worst. Here's an example in which each business reacting in what's best for it, jacking up prices in this case, could produce stagflation. The worst possible outcome. The extra money doesn't get people back to work, but does produce a wild inflation. That's not what the Federal Reserve wants. But it is what the Federal Reserve risks, and they know that. Yeah.
They want to give people this money, I mean, they not give. I mean, that's what we should be saying, don't borrow, take. But how can lending people money doesn't, I mean, I don't exactly understand how lending the people money and not paying them can, I mean, they're giving the banks money.
Yes.
And the banks would normally lend to businesses.
And individuals, both. Remember, consumer lending has become a very large and important part. It wasn't 40 years ago. But one of the results of the last 30 years, remember the story? Wages didn't go up for 30 years, so the masses had to borrow to realize the American dream.
They've gone through that process and seen that the people don't have the money to pay it back with.
Oh, no, careful.
No.
They made a fortune for 30 or 40 years. You look at the money earned by Citibank, Bank of America, any of them, off of consumer lending, it was the growth for 30 years. They made a fortune. They didn't know how to stop. They didn't know how to take it to a point where it can't be sustained. They didn't want to face the fact that they were lending more and more money to people whose wages were not going to go up, so they couldn't eventually pay it back. That was a limited process that would blow up. And now they're taking the steps to recoup from that. They're basically taking back all those houses. Remember, they made loans. The people who can't pay, screw them. They've paid for 10 years on a house with a 20-year loan. They're losing everything. All that money they put in, it's gone. The bank recoups this house, holds it, transforms it into a rental property, and will make its money, even now, from this operation. Remember what happens when you can't pay your mortgage. The house is still there. You're gone, but the house isn't. And the house is taken back to be used in a new program of these banks, and so forth and so on. There are major bank processes, for those of you that are interested, that are sweeping across the United States today, buying up all these foreclosed homes at a song and transferring them into rental property. They're approaching, millions of Americans are going to have this experience in the next 5 years. They're going to be approached by a bank which says, okay, sir, madam, we're going to foreclose. You're not paying your mortgage, and so you have two choices. You can be thrown out. We're going to throw you out 3 months. You'll be out of here. Or you sign a long-term lease with us to become a renter. You can stay in the house, but you have to sell it to us at a ridiculous price. You take all the loss, but we'll let you stay here as long as you pay us at least X dollars a month. They figured it all out. They will make money in this system, and you will be able to stay in the house. But all the equity you built up, gone. You don't own anything. You may have poured $150,000 of your money into that house, all gone. But you can stay there. You will not have to suffer the indignity of being thrown out on the street. Your children can stay in the school where their friends are. You can stay. But you'll become a debt peon. You will have nothing, and you will have this apartment, and you'll have to pay this rental. And that's how you're life. And Americans who became homeowners are now in the process of being converted back into renters. Yeah.
What about the third scenario? How do you evaluate the possibility of deflation?
It's always a risk. That is, just for everyone to understand, if something isn't done in a crisis, if you have this many unemployed people who can't buy stuff, and this many businesses going out, then you get to a situation where you provoke in many of the remaining businesses the following decision. I make something. I am accumulating unsold stuff because the economy is so down, people are not buying my stuff. I'm now spending money to store stuff, which I'm not sure I'm ever going to be able to sell. So that this money that I'm spending to store is money I cannot afford because it's going nowhere. I would be, here comes the punchline, I'd be better off, my losses would be less if I took the stuff that I've accumulated that I can't sell and unloaded it by bringing down the price. Then at least I get some money, I don't have the storage costs anymore, and I can try to survive. This, of course, forces your competitor into a new dilemma because you're selling the stuff at a reduced price. He can't sell his now unless he does that also. And now it goes, and you begin to get a general collapse in prices. That's always a problem in a crisis that is sharp, as ours has been, and a crisis that lasts, as ours is doing. Let me give you an example. In the Great Depression in the 1930s, workers' wages dropped, but workers' wages dropped less than the deflation we had here in the United States. So that workers' real wages actually went up. The money they lost, which hurt, was compensated by the fact that prices fell even more. That could happen in the United States also. We could have a deflation. The danger of that is that, think for a minute, if prices generally dropped in the United States, several things would immediately happen. Not only would the goods you buy drop, but your wages would drop too, because every employer would be desperate since they were getting less and less money for what they sell to pay less and less for the goods they buy, the inputs, the working wages, and so on. Everything, that's what deflation means, all the prices, wages and included, go down. We're a country that's heavily in debt. Always have to remember that. When you have a debt, it's fixed. I owe Joe $50,000. If all the prices go down and my wages go down, the burden of that fixed debt becomes larger and larger. We now have a whole generation of young people graduating from college carrying huge debts. If there's a deflation, they default. En masse, they cannot. Their wages will go down, the price of everything will go down, but their debt is fixed in dollars. So what you have when you have an inflation, a deflation, is a whole nother set of social problems provoked by that very prospect. So my guess is that that's so frightening to the people that another reason among the many to pump more money in is it prevents that. It prevents falling prices because you've pumped so much liquidity in, so they will not have a deflation because they're terribly afraid that a deflation in a society that has just come off the biggest accumulation of consumer and personal debt in the history of our country. We are more indebted as a people now than ever before. Those debts would be wiped out by an inflation. Remember, if I get twice the amount of money next year that I got this year, then my fixed dollar debt is much less burdensome for me. Inflations wipe out that. Europeans and Chinese who own dollars are terribly afraid that a Sarah Palin government, which they take seriously, a Sarah Palin government would inflate like crazy to cancel the debts. it would drive all the prices up. So a debt, if I owe $10,000, but next year my salary is twice what it is this year, then the debts are wiped out. Inflations wipe out debts. Inflations wipe out savings. So you got to see who's stuck with these things. We're not a society that has any savings, so that's not a risk. We don't. We save nothing anymore. So, but we have enormous debts. It's very tempting to cancel your debts by producing an inflation. But that makes everybody who owns your currency freaked. And the risk to the United States is if the people of the world who have dollars really got rid of them, and I'm thinking here of all the people that own the debt of the United States denominated in dollars, bonds, treasury bonds. If you know how this works, if everybody dumps treasury bonds, the interest rate, which is the obverse of the price of the bond, goes up. If the Chinese unloaded tomorrow half, even a third of their holdings of treasury, interest rates would spike in this country. That would end our housing market, that would end the automobile market, that would throw us immediately into another deep recession. And Washington understands that. That's why it cannot do anything about China except make a lot of silly noise